Where I think probable cause should appropriately be placed is not, in fact, where it is placed in our current legal system. And that's why I think probable cause in America is a broken legal concept that's not adequately serving its intended purpose, the probable cause threshold. It also should be noted that there may be shades of probable cause in different legal contexts. These terms of art can mean different things in different legal contexts because there could be different public policy questions at play. I would argue that the probable cause that ought to be required for advancing someone to a full-blown criminal trial probably ought to be higher than the probable cause that's required for a search warrant, for example, or to make an arrest in the first place, for example. There may be a report of a just committed armed robbery with a detailed description, and the cops arrive on the scene, and there's a guy who matches the description, so they want to arrest that guy. Normally for arrest, you need probable cause to believe the person committed a crime. Do we really want that to be 51% before the cops can make a lawful arrest of that suspect who matches the description of an apparently identical person who just committed an armed robbery? I'd say probably not, but keep in mind the inconvenience to the person arrested is also much less than if they're subject to a criminal trial where there's a 10% chance that even the most innocent defendant gets convicted and sent to prison for the rest of their life, which is what would happen here if this officer is convicted of this second-degree murder charge.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Happy Super Bowl Sunday. Thanks for tuning in. We have a little bit of competition for viewers tonight, but thank you guys all for joining us. We got a great weekly Rescue Michigan live stream tonight. We've got a number of things to talk about. Man, it has been a busy week for me. I don't know about you guys. How's everyone doing? We are, for the first time, we are streaming not only on our regular channels, Facebook, Rumble, and YouTube. We are also right now streaming for the first time on Twitter. So if anybody has a Twitter account, I have never watched a live stream on Twitter before. Apparently they do it though. So if anybody has a Twitter account, if you can go to see us on Twitter, see if it's actually working. And if you guys comment there, if they show up here, I have no idea how any of that's going to work, but hey, we're giving it a try. So there you go. Apologies for the little bit of a mess in the backdrop there. I am in the middle of repainting a wall, and that's been taking longer than it should because what a busy week in politics it has been. I can barely believe that this is the first live stream I've done since the email blast I did this past Monday talking about Michigan's primary. And I guess we should probably start with that, although I should at least provide a little bit of context for that opening video we just saw. That was Andrew Branca, who is the foremost self-defense attorney in America. I think, according to him, the only attorney who specializes solely in self-defense cases, talking about the case of, I believe it's, is it Christopher Schur? I believe is his name. Christopher Schur, who is a Grand Rapids police officer facing murder charges for shooting and killing Patrick Lyoya is his name, who was pulled over at a traffic stop for having a license plate that did not belong to the car, i.e. either just covering up for not having registration or having a stolen plate or a stolen car, who knows. Lawful stop led to he ran away from the police. The police chased him. There was a struggle in which the suspect wrested the taser out of the cop's hands, and then a struggle began. They wrestled to the ground, and the officer was now fighting for control of the violently resisting, lawfully arrested suspect's deadly weapon. That was the police officers that was now in the control of the suspect. And as a result of that, he is facing second-degree murder charges. And I mentioned that a little bit in today's email. And there's a little bit of context about that, about the concept of probable cause and how he was allowed to even face a trial when the judge said point blank in his decision about probable cause that the evidence was clear because they had all this on video. They had it on the police camera's footage. They had it on a witness's camera. They had it on the dash camera. Everyone could see exactly what happened that day. And it was everything I just told you is undeniable. That this guy he had stolen a weapon from a cop, a deadly weapon. A taser can be used to disable and then go on to kill a cop. And the cop fought back to defend his life, which anybody could. You have to be a cop to do that. if you're fighting for control of your own firearm from someone who's trying to take it away from you, you have a self-defense case in that kind of context, where someone who is violently assaulting you and has their hands on your deadly weapon, they are now in partial, at least, control of your weapon. Anyway, we'll come back to that story in a little bit. I wanted to back up because I did an email blast about this past Monday, and I haven't answered anybody's questions about this. By the way, hey, everybody in the chat. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Patty. Hi, Dwayne and Richard, and anyone else out there. Thank you all for tuning in on Super Bowl Sunday. Pam and Jojo Pixie Poo in Rumble. That name gets me every time. Thank you guys for joining us on all of these platforms. Anyway, I don't know how clear it was to everybody because it's a little bit complicated how presidential primaries work. So I wanted to kind of explain this to everyone and let me know if this doesn't make sense and if it's unclear to people. Because for those who don't know, I think most of our audience does, but maybe not all of them. Michigan's Republican Party is having their state convention this next Thursday, when they are going to elect who runs that state party. The chair, various vice chairs, and various district chairs, district committees, and the state committee of the state party. One of the things that most of them, well, the state committee members in particular, will have the ability to decide is how Michigan conducts its presidential nomination contests. And here's the thing. What the Democrats did this past month, I think just a week or two ago, they introduced a bill, they skipped the committee process, took it straight to the floor, passed it on a partisan basis, and it right to the governor's office to sign it, to move Michigan's presidential primary up until late February. And here's the thing about doing that. The parties don't like it when states go early. You know, you've always heard New Hampshire is first in the nation, and then there's the Iowa caucuses, and there's the South Carolina primary, and then there's Super Tuesday and all these other things. There's an important reason why the primaries are structured this way. And it's actually, strangely enough, a populist reason. What would it be like if every single state decided who they're going to nominate for the president on the same day? What would that mean for someone running for president? It would mean you would have to be spending money and competing in all 50 states, meaning the candidate with the most money would win every time. But when you have these small states going early, like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina is relatively small, they go early, that forces the campaigns to all campaign in these heartland states and reach out to working class voters, and they're targeting a relatively small audience. It's a way for the lesser known candidates to be able to compete. And that's been the way it's done for a very long time. And strangely, even the Democrats have gone by this system, but the Republicans too. And so when states try to jump ahead, jockeying for influence in the contest, the party sanctions them. And this has happened in the past in Michigan. This happened in 2008 and in 2012. And again, that was the reason why the party decided to move the primary so early, was because at the time, you remember who was running for president in 2008 and 2012? Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney had an enormous political influence on Michigan. Why? Because his dad was governor here. And that means he had a political machine loyal to him. His niece is from here. You know, Rana. So it was a foregone conclusion, according to the party operatives and all that, the people that were working in these presidential contests, that Mitt Romney was going to win Michigan. And the Republican establishment wanted Mitt Romney to win Michigan for that same reason. So they moved the primary extremely early. That was the idea. By the way, I'm seeing I got low bars according to StreamYard here, so I apologize if I'm breaking up, folks. I cannot control my internet signal, so I hope I'm still coming through clear here. Anyhow, so that's what they did. They moved the primary early, and the Republican Party bosses at the time were all happy with that because they were Romney supporters for the most part, and that's all they had to be. So in 2008, the Republican National Committee said, okay, well, we're going to sanction your national delegates. Half of them are not going to be allowed to vote at our national convention. They can still come, but they're not going to be allowed to vote. They're not going to be allowed to vote on the rules. They're not going to be allowed to vote on the platform. They're not going to be allowed to do anything else except show up and party with other national Republicans. Well, in 2008, Mitt Romney did not become the nominee. John McCain did. And I guess in the interest of building unity, John McCain said, you know what, Michigan, you can have your delegates. Go ahead. I don't mind. I'm the nominee. It's all good. So they got to the national convention and they got to vote anyway. In 2012, that's not what happened. In 2012, Mitt Romney was the nominee. And this time, and it could be for any number of reasons, I don't know how things worked at the RNC that year, but this time they stuck to their penalty. And they said, you know what, you're going to send half of your delegates. And if you want to send the rest, they're going to be called delegates in waiting and alternates in waiting. In case of the last minute we change our minds, which they did not. So we sent national delegates to the RNC, but half of them were designated as in waiting. So cut to present day. Now the Republican Party's rules say that you're going to be penalized 85% of your delegates if you go before the first week of March. Now this time, the Democrats are in absolute total control of the Michigan law. They have the House, they have the Senate, they've got the governor's race, the governor's mansion rather. So they passed this law to move Michigan's primary early, which if we use it, will penalize our delegates 85% of our delegation. Will not be able to vote at the national convention, unless perhaps the RNC forgives us, which they could, but who knows? There is another subtext to the whole thing the Democrats said. Why did the Democrats do that? Why did they move the primary up so early? Well, one possible reason was to screw over the Republicans. That may well have played a part in it. Certainly could have. But of course, what's going on the Democrat side? Well, Joe Biden's the incumbent. Typically, the incumbent runs for re-election. And when that happens, there's no real presidential contest. It's a coronation. So what does Michigan care? What do Democrats care when we have our primary? Joe Biden's running for re-election. Why should they care? They shouldn't. But that might be not what happens. And by a whole lot of indications, notably Joe Biden's chief of staff resigning, that's a huge thing. The Democrats are indeed preparing to throw him under the bus. By hook or by crook, they're not going to let him run for re-election. Or they're just going to run someone else against him. And if you've seen the polls, Joe Biden is not the least bit popular among any voters right now, compared to presidents in the past. They don't want Joe Biden to have a head-to-head against Donald Trump again. So, all of that having been done, here's what I suggested in the email that went out this past Monday. And here's why this is important in the context of this state convention that's coming up, where we choose who the Republican Party leaders are. Here's the thing. The political parties, not the state of Michigan, not the legislature, choose how each party nominates their candidate for president. The publicly funded, taxpayer-funded primary is essentially only an elective option that the parties can choose to use. And they often do, because, the appearance of participatory democracy and all that other blah, 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 it looks good, etc. But other states do it differently. That's why Iowa has the caucuses. They have a whole internal affair within their party. It's a big fundraising event. It's a big party, and they invite people to come and caucus. The Democrats have done that before. They've done that in Michigan before. They do that in a lot of states. They're more comfortable with caucusing than we are. So the Republican Party could say, let's not have a taxpayer-funded primary. Let's have an internal caucus, and we'll write our own rules for it on the date that we choose. That's another option they could choose. Another option they could choose is to just not have a presidential primary at all. Cancel it. And what would happen then? Well, whether or not we have a primary next year, there is a process that we go through to elect the delegates to the national convention. And what that is similar to what we just had we're in the middle of, where you have a round of conventions. You have a county convention in each county where you elect delegates to the state convention. Then you have a state convention. At the one coming up next Thursday, we're electing our party leadership. At one coming up next year, we elect national delegates and our national committee men and national committee women. And that's how we decide who we send to the RNC. And what's happened in past years is the party rules specify that those delegates are bound to support the candidate who wins the primary in their congressional districts if the candidate is still in the race. So what happened in 2012 was that Mitt Romney won, I think, most congressional districts in Michigan, but also Rick Santorum won a few, if I recall correctly. And so the national delegates were in districts bound for Mitt Romney because he won, obliged to vote for Mitt Romney at the national convention. But in the districts that Rick Santorum won, because he dropped out of the race before the national convention, the national delegates in those districts were unbound and they could vote for whoever they wanted to nominate for president. So if Michigan's Republican Party chooses to cancel the primary, one option they have is not to have any public contest. The precinct delegates elect the state delegates who elect the national delegates, and those national delegates vote for whoever they want for president. Now, think about it for a minute before you write this off as impossibly arcane and this would be unpopular and blah, blah, blah. Think about it. In the upcoming election, you're going to have Donald Trump. You may or may not have Ron DeSantis in the race, governor of Florida. And you will have some number of pieces of crap. Frankly, you will have Nikki Haley, John Bolton, who else? Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney, Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, people that either always hated Donald Trump from the get-go or betrayed him in their service to him in varying degrees, from Mike Pence all the way up to Nikki Haley. So, and John Bolton, who literally were sabotaging him every day they were in his cabinet. Was John Bolton the cabinet member? Is the National Security Advisor cabinet member? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Anyway, here's my point. Let me just say, I love Ron DeSantis. In fact, I like him better than Trump, honestly. But A, he may not run at all. And then the choice is clearly Trump. B, even if he does, he may not have a good shot at winning a primary any more than he would winning a convention fight. But think about how this works if the Republicans cancel their primary. The first thing is we get our delegates back to the national convention. Secondly, all of the Republican voters in Michigan are now free to vote in the Democrats' presidential primary, which may be an open contest. So how's that for turnabout? What are the Democrats going to be able to do about that? Well, who knows? Maybe Joe Biden will be running unopposed. I doubt that's the case. What else are their options? They can push the primary back again and look like idiots for passing that law in the first place. They can cancel their own primary, and then all of the Democrat voters are going to be angry that they've been disenfranchised and blah, 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 blah. Or they allow us to vote in their primary. What other options are there for them? It puts it all back on them. So I'm just tossing this out there, folks. If you have people in your congressional districts running for state committee and you are a state delegate, you might want to get their opinion on this scenario. I'll bet you they haven't put much thought into it. And fair enough, because I only threw it out there this past Monday. But that is a distinct possibility for one method that the Republicans could actually, for once, this entire cycle, get back to Democrats, which, in case you guys haven't been paying attention to the recent headlines, ain't happening all that often. So, all right. So for tonight, I want to talk about candidate recruitment and vetting, because it's never too early to do that. In fact, we need people to start running for a lot of these seats early, even the ones that are not coming up until next November. We got to start early, and that means finding the strongest candidates to run for these seats. But let me first tell you a little bit about why I'm talking about this tonight. And of course, I'm going to talk about Mike Mueller. I've known about Mike Mueller for some time. He was one of the candidates, one of the few Republicans. There was more Democrats than Republicans that did this, that in the height of the COVID pandemic, after 3 weeks of the legislature doing absolutely nothing and letting Gretchen Whitmer destroy our state with her lockdowns, only finally came to convene session weeks later, and only for the purpose of extending the governor's emergency powers, which according to them, for some reason, was going to strengthen their legal arguments in their lawsuit against her. I don't know if that's true or not. It's neither here nor there. They did actually win their lawsuit, by the way. I don't know if that made a difference or not. But the amazing thing was, on this bill that they voted on, which normally requires a roll call vote of all members. They suspended the rules, establishing a very dangerous precedent, by the way, and had a voice vote on a bill to extend the governor's lockdown privileges that they claimed they were lending her. So there was no roll call vote on this at all, except for one vote there was that day, was them checking in at their desks. And I was in Lansing protesting the lockdowns that very day, so I saw what they were doing. They had a trickle of lawmakers coming in and leaving. I remember seeing, well, I won't name names, it doesn't matter, because most of them were doing this. They were pulling into the parking lot, walking from their car to the Capitol, checking at their desks, and 5 minutes later, they were going home. There was no vote on it, which is aggravating if you're an organization that wants to beat these lawmakers up for casting bad votes when there's no vote on the record. But there was one vote on the record that day, and that was their attendance vote. And Mike Mueller was among, I think it was like 8 Republicans and 15 Democrats, something like that, that didn't even show up at their desk when Michigan was in its darkest hour. When Michigan needed those people, the sole representatives of 90,000 people apiece, they were AWOL. So I lit up quite a bit over that. In fact, I guess I might as well tell you the story. That's why I no longer work in Lansing, folks, because that was a little bit before the candidate filing deadline in 2020. And so I called some friends of mine in an organization called the Michigan Conservative Coalition, or maybe it was Trump Republican. What was one of their organizations? And said, you guys got to put out an email telling people to primary anyone that didn't show up that day. And they're like, you want to write it? I was like, yeah, sure. Well, we got back to leadership that I wrote that email. And as soon as I heard that, and they told me I was getting thrown under the bus, you might guess who did it. I just immediately had to resign from Lansing because I did what someone working inside Lansing shouldn't do, and that's be an outsider. And I will own that and take responsibility for it. I'm not blaming the people that told on me. It was my own damn fault for doing that because I was working for a lawmaker. Once it got out that I was coordinating with an outside organization and attacking their colleagues, like, John, you couldn't work with your colleagues if I stayed in your office. I have to leave. So I cleaned up my desk, and sure enough, a few weeks later, John got the call from leadership. Hey, we got to talk about your employee. He might not be a good fit for you. And John's like, he's already gone. So that was the end of that. That was the end of that story. So, but I remember those lawmakers that didn't even bother to show up while our state was on fire. Michael Mueller was one of those cowards. And he did a bunch of other bad things too. He supported the marijuana cartel bill that came through the House this past year. We managed to kill it on the floor, but it got through his committee. He voted for it. So, and there were several other things, but, anyway. But what Mike Mueller's done up until this point was nothing compared to what he did this week. So for those who have not heard the full story, we've talked about, and I'm starting to lose track, guys, because I do these weekly Operation Watchdog calls every Tuesday night, and sometimes did I talk about that on the Sunday stream or the Tuesday stream? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I talked about some of the most dangerous bills the Democrats had moving through Lansing. One of them was a bill to expand the earned income tax credit, as it's called, which sounds wonderful. It's an income tax cut for working people, the poorest working people, the people that need a tax cut the most. Sounds wonderful. In concept, it would be. However, there's a thing about it, which is that it's, first of all, it's federal and state, and they compound. And secondly, it's what's called refundable, which means if you get a credit for more than what you owed in the first place, you literally just get a check in the mail. And guess what? Most of these low-income working class people don't owe any federal income tax and barely pay any state tax or federal tax. So they just get checks in the mail. So it's not a tax credit because you're not being credited back money you didn't pay in the first place. It's money being taken from other taxpayers and given to you. And incidentally, about a quarter of all the recipients of the EITC are actually ineligible and just committing fraud. Or, I'm sorry, maybe they're just making an innocent mistake. So that passed with, by the way, most House Republicans voting with the Democrats in favor of that, despite the fact that Republicans themselves just rolled that back a few years ago. The Republicans in the Senate remembered that one. But that was one thing that they did. Another thing that they did was to have a huge cut on the tax that on pension income. which is something that, of course, only people with pensions pay. So the Democrats have been attacking this for years. This was their HB 4001, their first bill. I think it was Senate Bill 1 as well. It was their first bill. They called it a tax cut, repealing the pension tax. Well, it wasn't a tax cut. It was a targeted tax break for only one class of people who primarily are government employees, people with pensions. People that don't work for the government tend not to have pensions. They have 401ks or something else. So that's what that was all about. And I think 8 Republicans, was it, in the House? Or maybe it was 9 or 10 or 11, whatever it was. 11. That's right. It was 11 House Republicans voted for that turkey. Again, tax cuts for things that Democrats support. And that bill was sent to the Senate. Well, guess what? There's a rule that says you can't pass a law that only affects that affects more than one law. You can't amend 2 different laws in one bill. Well, unfortunately, the Income Tax Act is only one law. So you can roll a whole bunch of changes to the income tax structure into one bill if you want. And the Democrats combined those things together. And here's the kicker. There was supposed to be a tax cut for all income taxpayers in Michigan. It's actually a law that kicks in when the increase in income tax revenue exceeds the rate of inflation, which I don't think it really did, but the way they cooked the books, they finessed the numbers. It actually did work out that way. And people in Michigan were entitled to an income tax cut. So the Democrats came up with a lovely plan, which was, we're going to take $500 million of the income taxes you paid last year, and we're going to claim it didn't go to the Treasury in the first place. No. It went to the strategic fund, to go to the SORA fund, or SOAR fund. And it wasn't tax revenue at all. No, it was a payment that you paid under threat of going to jail, or if you resist that, being shot to death by government officials. You know, it's not a tax or anything like that. No, something completely different. It wasn't a tax at all. Not a tax. It was something else you paid. And therefore, it doesn't count for tax revenue because it went to the SOAR fund. So you don't get a tax cut at all, Michigan. Haha. We just spent all of your surplus giving it back to the people Democrats like. By the way, there's also, like, I think $700 million or something just in cash payments to people all over the place. It's your Gretsch bucks. Everyone will be getting that. Got my Gretsch bucks. Everybody gets a tax break except regular people. And the amazing thing was that perhaps after all of the, let's just say, grief they got from their constituents over their bad votes on the EITC and the pension tax, or the pension credit, I should say, the Republicans in the House were finally all ready to vote no on all of this, especially once that little spiking of the income tax cut was thrown in there. And amazingly, there was one Democrat who refused to vote for it. His name was Dylan Wegela of Garden City, Michigan. And man, can you imagine what that guy must have put up with to vote no to the end on that? I'll bet my bottom dollar he was offered everything in the world and then threatened with everything in the world, right up to a primary challenger. The same way, you remember when Karen Whitsett, she got COVID and got healed with ivermectin and said so publicly and thanked Donald Trump for the suggestion. And the Democrats threatened to and did primary her. And she still held her seat, but that's what they do to people that get out of line. That's why the Democrats don't have a problem with people voting with the other side very often, because they do hold their party accountable in a way that Republicans too often don't. But anyway, this one brave soul, Dylan Wegela, looked at all this crap and said, I'm not voting for all this. And now the Democrats couldn't get this bill through the House because it required having a majority of members serving, which is 56, which is all the Democrats have. So they were one vote short. And so that's when they went to Mike Mueller. And I don't know what they offered him. I've heard it was that pension tax cut was part of it. Because Mike Mueller was a cop. That's what he wanted. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've been told. Whatever it was not enough. Because everything the Democrats wanted, they just got. Including, of course, guess what all of that money is going to? That SOAR fund. That's all money for special interests. It's all money that Gretchen Whitmer now controls. And that means all of the lobbyist money that in the past cycles went to Republicans is now going all to the Democrats. So all the setbacks we had last year, next year we've got all of those, plus all the Lansing money going to Democrats. And of course, on top of that, Proposal 2. So that's what we're dealing with this next election. And it might not have happened if not for one House Republican, Mike Mueller. So that's why I want to talk about candidate recruitment, because he's probably not going to be the last Republican to break faith. And we need to recruit candidates, folks. Of course, also to run against Democrats, by the way. I'm not just entirely focusing on the bad Republicans out there. And of course, there's everything else. There's school board races, county commission races, everything out there. So I want to take a moment just to share with you guys a few tips for candidate recruitment, because we need serious patriots to run for a whole lot of seats in Michigan. Let me start with this point. The best candidates you will ever find are the ones that have to be found, not the ones that jump up and assert themselves and say, I want to run for the seat. Because they may say that they're patriots and they may sincerely believe it. But the people who have an inclination towards office are people that have an inclination towards power. They're people that think highly of themselves. And most often, they're the people who are the first to sell out or get spun around when they get into power because they think they know better. And when pressure mounts, what do they think to themselves? Well, gosh, I couldn't possibly still be a patriot if I wasn't here at all. So I guess I better vote my district on this one. And pretty soon they're voting with the Democrats all the time. And frankly, a lot of these proudest patriots are the people that end up disappointing us the most when they get into office because of their conceit. Like, of course, Cindy Gamrat and Todd Corser, who ran as great Tea Party patriots and then within months of getting to Lansing began having an affair, got caught, lied about it, got expelled, sued the House, and everything else. What an embarrassment to all the patriots in Michigan who supported them. And when they got kicked out of office, guess who replaced them? Well, in Lapeer, you had a terrible rhino, Gary Howell, who got to serve in the House for 7 years because he won in a special election. Although now they get 12. But I digress. The people you want to run for office are people you seek out. So let me talk a little bit about finding them. Those of you who have been involved in Rescue Michigan might know we have a whole statewide file of voters that has a whole lot of information about them. Party affiliation, income information, donor history, profession information, lawyers, farmers, social workers, felons, business owners, GOP donors, Democrat donors, PAC donors. This information is in there and it's available and you can get it at rescuemichigan.com. In fact, you might not want to get it just this moment because A, we're still waiting for the updates from the November 22 election data. And B, I'm actually building a tool like this for my county GOP now. And I mean, I've been distributing these files to people all over Michigan for the past 2 years, but now I'm really getting hands-on with people in our county, giving them these tools and seeing them put them to use. So it's going to be a whole process of building and expanding and improving all these tools for people. But anyway, if you go out and knocking on doors, chances are you're going to find people who have these qualities that you are looking for in a candidate. You know, I knocked on doors in my precinct and there was one house that was like the biggest house in the precinct by far. The guy who was there signed my Unlock Michigan petition enthusiastically. Turns out, I think he was either a township trustee himself or that was his brother. I think, yeah, it was his brother. That's right. Now I remember for sure. Yeah, Dwayne Gritter says, exactly. I know a person who had to be asked twice, 6 weeks apart. She is so humble. Same story with John Riley. He was involved in the grassroots group and he ran because he couldn't find anybody else to run. And finally he said, all right, I'm going to do it. I heard the same thing from Shane Hernandez. I have no reason to doubt his story. They were looking for candidates and they finally said, you're the guy. And she said, oh, okay, all right, I'll do it. And Shane Hernandez and John Riley served with distinction as with some of the greatest lawmakers we have had in their time in office. So there's things to look for. Number one, someone that's going to run for office has to be charismatic and they have to get elected. So it really does help when they have personal charisma. And, you know, that's a hard thing for people because we don't all have it, folks. And I'll tell you, if you guys think I'm charismatic on this program, maybe because I've been doing it a while, it might seem that way. I'm not a charismatic person, period. And I know that. And if I want to go out and knock on doors, I'll remind myself of that, discovering it firsthand. The kind of people that you just immediately gravitate towards and like they're actually kind of hard to come by. I'll show you an example. I absolutely do not mean to pick on this guy. I really, honestly, truly, I do not. But I'm just going to show you because he was the guy that ran against Mike Mueller in the last election. And his name's Dylan Pasquarello. Great guy. He was an intern in John Riley's office. There's a closer picture of him. But, I mean, just looking at the photo of him, he's very young, kind of scrawny, kind of nerdy looking. Does that mean he wouldn't be a great rep? No, it doesn't mean that. But next to big, beefy, former cop, former Navy Mike Mueller, there's a charisma gap there. And that sucks. But that's the way it goes sometimes. And you got to find people that have that personal charisma. Another important factor is where people are in their lives. And that can be a real issue on both sides. A really young person might have the get up and go to do it, but they might also be trying to start a family. They might be holding down a full-time job. They might not be able to put their all into it because running for office is a lot of time and a lot of money. On the flip side, someone who is retired might have a lot of time and a lot of money, but they might not be good at knocking on doors. And that can be a problem. Jeff Noble won a term in Lansing, and going into his second term, his re-election campaign, his knees gave out on him. He couldn't knock on doors because he couldn't walk. I mean, he couldn't walk to the extent that he needed to. And he ended up not winning re-election because his opponent was able to outwalk him. And that's a problem too. So who are you generally looking for? Charismatic people, middle-aged, kids in college, they got their savings. You try to talk them into running. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. We had a great guy. I wanted to run for a special election. Absolutely qualified, charismatic, wealthy, kids in college, perfect. Didn't want to do it because he wanted to make more money for his business. Tried my best to talk him into it. Couldn't do it. That happens too. So you can't put all of your eggs in one basket. But the best way to get out and find someone who might be suitable is to knock on a lot of doors and find somebody who resonates with you and has these personal qualities that are good. Now, the next thing is vetting the candidates. And again, here too, someone who might on paper look good does not look good when you start really getting into things. And this is important too. So there's a whole lot of things I look for when I interview candidates. First off, I'll ask them point blank, and they might not tell me, but I'll do my level best to research. What's the one thing that you would never want your opponent telling the voters about you in your past? Anything. And sometimes those can be overcome depending about what they are. Criminal history, divorces, that can be messy. Not necessarily deal breakers, but potentially obstacles. We've all heard from candidate so-and-so and his ex-wife or estranged daughter says, I'm voting for the Democrat because I hate my father-in-law or whatever. There's all stories like that all over the place. Mary Trump. Yeah, I mean, Joe Bellino ran on being a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. Had he not been open about that and the opponent used that against him, that'd be a problem. You got to do your research. A few years ago, we had a guy named Jordan Haskins who ran for state house. And it turned out he had a criminal history involving a bizarre sexual fetish that involved stealing cars. And this guy, imagine, it was a seat that the Republicans didn't think they could win, which means it was probably not going to be heavily contested. He might have easily won the primary. And even if it was a tough seat, the Republicans can't win. What an embarrassment to the ticket that would have been. The Democrats had one of those last year. The guy who was the nominee who threatened to shoot up a school, that came out. His opponent won. So those things can come out, and you've got to do everything you can to find out anything you can, and hopefully they'll tell you about the skeletons in their closet, because I promise you, the opponents will find that out. It's also really important to figure out how in tune with the district a person is. And typically wealthy people often are, but you don't know. And you got to ask. One great question I love asking candidates is, what are the top 25 issues in your district? Not necessarily something the legislature can do something about or whatever office they're running for, but what are the top 25 issues in your community? Most people can't get to 5, but I promise you, when you go out knocking on doors, you'll get more than 25 different questions on different topics. Before long, they'll find that out. So it's okay if they don't know in the interview, but check back with them. Ask if they're doing this research. What organizations are they affiliated with? What have they given money to? These are important questions. They can be, often they're good things. You know, Knights of Columbus or American Legion or whatever, but find out what organizational affiliations they may have. And there might be some negatives too. There might be bad affiliations that make them completely unelectable. For example, you might have been the attorney for Todd Courser, the state rep that got expelled for having an affair and lying about it. And then you went and, on behalf of Todd Courser, you sued the state house, the speaker of the house, every member of the committee to expel Cindy and Todd, the Detroit News for running the story, the Radisson Hotel where they were shacking up. And, you know, Lansing might react badly to you running for office. Wouldn't they, Matt DePerno? Wouldn't there be a whole lot of Lansing money that'd be absolutely frozen out because you backed a guy in a frivolous lawsuit that led to a $30,000 judgment against your client for violating the Detroit News's free speech rights to publish that story? That might be some baggage. And even if the voters don't hear about that, you know who might hear about that are the people that are going to be politically active and potentially involved or not involved in your campaign. So there's a side point in there somewhere. Did you guys pick up on that? There was something else I was talking about, but anyway, let's go back to talking about candidate vetting. Where was I? Oh yeah, other things to talk to your candidates about. There's a great little technique. We call it the Leesburg grid. And that's what we do is we ask them to write down the one thing personal about them that they want every voter in the district to know. The one political thing about them that they want every voter in the district to know. The one personal thing and the one political thing they want every voter in the district to know about each of their opponents. And then conversely, what's the one personal and one political thing about them that their opponents are going to want every voter in the district to know about? And also, by the way, what's the one personal and political thing that the opponents are going to want everyone to know about themselves? Those tend to be the issues that are litigated in the campaign. And finding out what that one thing is a good thing to do. You'll often find a lot of them don't really have all that much to say for themselves. And that's, again, something that can be worked on if you force them to revisit it in a week. Did you do your homework? What's that one thing? That can be something. In a lot of campaigns, I'll talk to the candidates, and we've done often this piece I've called the wife letter. There's a thing called the wife letter in campaigns, but we did a specialized version of it that was like really long and intensely personal. I had to tell a story. And for some of my clients, it was tough to get the story out of the family member telling it. But once we did, it became a really effective piece. But these are things, you know, Mike Mueller, total rhino, but I saw his campaign piece when he ran in 2016, and it was like checking all the boxes. It was like farmer, not really, he inherited it, cop, business owner, military, and Republicans like, yep, checks all the boxes, great. As soon as I saw that campaign piece, I knew he was going to win. That's the kind of campaign piece you want to have if you've got a candidate that can say that's on my resume, you know. That went a long way for a lot of candidates. John James and Tom Barrett running on their not just military but aviation backgrounds. Obviously, military service is a big thing. Charities are a big thing. Being a business owner is a big thing, and professional experience can be too. Family life is important, not just for the resume, by the way. What does the spouse think about the candidate spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week running for office? You need to ask them point blank and get an answer from them. If they have a job, what does their employer think about it? How much of their own money are they willing to put into their campaign? That is a very important question that tells you how serious they are. And if they're waffly, tell them you want to pledge. Tell me right now you're going to put $10,000 into your race or I'm walking away. Ask them point blank. And it's the same as asking for donations. That's a lot of money. Yep, well, it's a position of serious responsibility. Whether it's, and by the way, I'm just talking about state rep. I'm talking about city council, school board. Those races ain't free. They're not cheap. They're not easy. Running for school board, you're competing with the labor union, the teachers union. They are a well-oiled political machine, and they will have advantages. If you don't have money and you can't raise it, and you've got nobody to call, then you've got a problem. So you got to ask them how much money they think they could raise if they called everybody and asked them to. And they may sell themselves short on that. How much could you raise if you were, ask yourself this. If you were suddenly broke, if your house was hit by a tornado, and you had to call every relative and former friend you've known in your life to ask them for money, how much do you think you could raise? I could probably raise more than $100,000 if my house was hit by a tornado and I needed to raise every cent I could. I wouldn't need $100,000 to replace my house. But I'm just saying, if you were in a position where you had to call everybody you knew and ask for a lot of money, how much could you get? That's the question. So all of these things are things to look for. And of course, the thing to look for is, are they grounded? How have their principles been tested? There's a few places to look on this. Have they been involved in the county GOP, the local GOP, or some other organization that tests your patience if you're involved for any extended period? Because, a lot of people get involved in their GOP or support a candidate or whatever, and they get into a fight with somebody, and they throw up their hands and quit. I've seen a few of those just this past week. Got in a fight, didn't like how it went, and they're out. So much for all that. We got to save our country stuff, great spiritual awakening stuff. No, didn't go their way. They didn't like how they were treated at a meeting, and they're gone. You want to find people that have potentially been tested in this or some other aspect of their life that tests their faith, their patience, and their principles. So ask them. Ask them if they have a story like that. Maybe they do. Maybe they're too humble to say it. But ask around. Maybe someone knows it. And of course, what is their political affiliation? Have they read anything Ron Paul's written, or Murray Rothbard, or Henry Hazlitt? Or Hayek? Do they know the classics? Do they have any? Or are they going to get to Lansing and they hear, oh, this is a targeted tax cut for a corporation? That's a good thing. It's going to mean they're going to actually pay more tax. Oh, they didn't know the broken window fallacy, huh? You do want someone that's going to have a clue what they're doing when they get there, and is going to have some ability, some moral grounding, since everything they do is a moral question, by the way. Every single vote is a moral question. It's not a deal breaker if they're not Christian, by the way. And Christians often do terrible things, in case you haven't seen those. But try to get some sense of how their faith decides their ethics. And again, the best of it is the proof when you have an incident you can point to and say, I've seen this person do the right thing when doing the right thing was the harder thing to do. Because I've never seen pressure make a hero in a capital before. So these are some of the things that you need to do to find these great candidates, folks. I strongly, strongly encourage you to look outside of your current political circles, knock on doors, meet new people, because some of the best people out there have gotten frustrated by politics and walked away because of the dysfunctionality of the business, and we get it. And a lot of people just said, I'm not going to run for office because I didn't think I could at the time, and I never reevaluated my opinion on this. So there's a lot of considerations out there. But I'm telling you, folks, in every precinct, there's going to be at least a few people who meet at least most of these qualifications. And not many of them will have the stones to primary an incumbent, although I sure wish they did. But, sometimes you get to talking about these things in meetings and letting them know how bad the incumbents are. And maybe some of them will be inspired to. And hopefully you can at least get them to run for an open seat, and compete with a Democrat that wants to deprive them of their liberty and their savings and their everything else. So anyway, that's my talk on candidate recruitment. I want to talk about one more thing before we call it a stream. And this is getting to the real nature of politics and politicians, which is one of the lectures that you will hear at our Grassroots Leadership School coming up in Ann Arbor on next Saturday, the 25th of February. Not this coming Saturday, but the one after that. And there's another one the Saturday after that, March 4th in Troy. So that is a great reminder that I usually need to plug things. So if you go to rescuemichigan.com, please sign up for the Grassroots Leadership Schools. They are in Ann Arbor and Troy. And you can also sign up for Operation Watchdog, where we watch all of this legislation so that we have the ability to stop it before it starts and hopefully stop it before it becomes a law. And of course, we got other nice petitions you can find at rescuemichigan.com as well. Oh, and of course, if you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and share and subscribe and all that good stuff on Facebook and Rumble and Twitter and YouTube. So thanks for taking a moment to do that. Smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Anyway, the real nature of politics and politicians. If you are interested in changing public policy, which for me is the only reason I care about any of this at all, I mean, really, what else is the point? To elect so-and-so because they're a good person? No, they're a means to an end. The end is to prevent tyranny and restore liberty. It's public policy. That's our goal. And if you are doing anything of any importance whatsoever towards restoring liberty, you need to make a politician do something that they do not want to do. Because anything worthwhile is controversial. And if you are doing any worthwhile, controversial thing, the politician is going to do anything that they can to get you to stop doing it. Because the other side is pushing on them too. And they would rather go along with one prevailing side than be shoved up against from two competing opposing sides. And what they'd prefer most of all is not to take a controversial position at all. The biggest inertia in politics is the status quo, because you don't alienate any voters and you can scoot right to re-election, folks. The Democrats are going to want to ram everything through that they possibly can in these first 6 months so that by November of 2024, people will have forgotten the damage they did. So the politicians will give you every reason why they can't support your constitutional carry legislation, every reason why they can't support your right to work law, every reason why we just can't give you an income tax this year, folks. Sorry, there's just no money in the budget. And they have all kinds of ways to make you stop, shut up, and go away. And when I worked for Campaign for Liberty, Ron Paul, I still work for Campaign for Liberty, but I used to do their national state email alerts. So we're doing all different state battles in different states. And it was a gun rights thing here, and a tax thing there, and a gold currency thing here, and getting a roll call vote on something else over there. And the way politicians react when grassroots organizations go out and try to get politicians to do something they don't want to do is always the same every time. If you don't have enough numbers, they'll be happy to ignore you. But when they start getting angry constituents who are asking them why they didn't co-sponsor Ron Paul's Audit the Fed bill and asking them why they voted for the cannabis cartel bill or anything else, and they start seeing ads and billboards and bad press and angry letters from volunteers and donors and things they don't like happening, things that make their reelection more difficult. God forbid a primary challenger. That's a lot of pain for a politician in one painful dosage right there. It's a primary challenger. Then they start to see what they can do to get you to stop. And one of the things I'm sure they'll do is they'll try to explain it to you. I got one of those calls last week from a politician in Lansing who probably thought it was all I'd need. You see, Adam, I just vote for all tax cuts. Yeah, tax cuts for special interests in Lansing. Tax cuts the Democrats let you vote for. When do the good guys get tax cuts? Oh, never. I see. Yeah, that's how that works. Thanks for explaining it to me, Congressman, state rep. They may try threatening you. Sometimes those threats are real. Threatening to call the police, threatening to accuse you of libel or slander. Gary Glenn was accused of soliciting a bribe for telling a politician that it'd be in his best interest to vote for right to work. That haunted him 20 plus years later when he ran for state senate in Michigan over a phone call, a perfectly legitimate phone call he made in Idaho, I believe it was, 20 plus years earlier. And that politician that threatened him, Jim Risch, went on to become a U.S. senator. I think he's like in Republican leadership right now. But more often, the threats are more subtle than that. If we do this, you're going to get something even worse. Nobody here is going to work with you if you keep making all these demands. I'm going to tell so-and-so that you're being really difficult to work with. I'm going to go back to your local GOP and tell them you're making trouble for me. You're making it hard for me to get reelected. You're practically helping the Democrats. These are the threats that politicians make. And some of the boss hog types will they'll jump at the opportunity to try to threaten you and make you feel like you have ticked off someone who's very powerful and controls lots of money and has powerful friends, and try to make you stop that way. And if explaining it to you doesn't work, and threats don't work, and ignoring you didn't work, they will probably try to buy you off. Be in my Citizens Council on the 10th Amendment. Be in my Citizens Council on tax reform or whatever. Be on my staff. Be on my campaign team. These are the favors, the baubles that politicians do to get you to change from being from being the grassroots as representative to the politicians, telling them what they must do, to being the grassroots as representative, telling you what you must settle for. Did I say that right? The politicians representative to the grassroots, telling them what they must settle for. The moment you take their offer, you become their servant. And I've got two notes to add to this. First is, it's not always the politician directly that does these things. Sometimes it's their minions, whether that's their staff or their volunteers or their friends. Sometimes it's the old lady at the church who tells you, bless your heart, Tim Walberg's a good man, and you shouldn't beat up on him. He's trying to do the best he can in Washington. Sometimes it does come from proxies. But the reason I wanted to tell you guys this story is because I've gotten some interesting responses to some of the heat I've been bringing to people in Lansing this past week. And I got one from someone in Lansing. And I won't say who it is, but this person claims to have very, very high level sources in Lansing and claims, and is, according to me, according to my phone, affiliated with someone who does work in Lansing and maybe is indeed someone that is in a position to know and is potentially even telling me the truth. So I kicked out an email blast yesterday saying a number of the things I just told you again tonight about Mike Mueller. And I got this response from him. Just wanted to let you know that Mueller has some serious mental health issues, PTSD plus. And there is word the Dems threatened him to vote with them. ... It goes on. But let me stop there and just point out, what do I care? They threatened him with what? They're going to take him out back and beat him up? Were they going to strip him of his committee assignments the way they never even gave some Republicans committee assignments? Were they going to not pass his bills? Like, they're not going to pass any bills worth anything that the Republicans are pushing. So what threats were they making? Oh, they're going to run a candidate against him? What do you think they're going to do next year? Not run a candidate against a Republican? But let me continue on with what this person in Lansing claims about Mike Mueller. He has some serious mental health issues, PTSD plus. There is word the Dems threatened him to vote with them. The talk was that, quote, I don't quite know what this means. They didn't want to see another black blanket, alluding to another state rep who had committed suicide. Just be careful, ... And there's other things that we went back and forth for a moment. The only other thing he made on that point was apparently leadership met with him, Mueller, and asked him to resign his seat. And so we went back and forth. As I said to him what I'm going to say to you guys right now. But his final response to me, worth repeating, was, it will eventually come out, but keep it on the DL. It is a pretty sad situation. Whoops, I didn't do that. Guess what, folks? These people in Lansing are public servants. Now, I'm going to address the possible scenario there is something really wrong with him. But let me first say, whenever a politician or their servants or their colleagues or people, and their unwitting servants perhaps, tell you something about the way things are, you have to ask yourself, how does it benefit them if I believe it? And by the way, look, I didn't tell you who the guy was, and I'm sure other people would have said the same thing. Doesn't matter who it is. It does not matter who it is. It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is what the claim is and whether or not that claim is substantiated. Well, gosh, I'm beating up on Mike Mueller so bad, he might resign. I'll laugh at that. But of course, there was also the suggestion he could even potentially, possibly, maybe commit suicide because he's getting beaten up so bad. Now, I do not know Mike Mueller well enough to know whether he has PTSD. And I do not know Mike Mueller well enough to know whether or not he could be suicidal. But there are some things about Mike Mueller that lead me to doubt that this is a real issue. First thing, if he has PTSD, when did he get it? When he was in Lansing? From hearing from all these angry constituents? Did Dylan Pescarolo, his primary challenger, give him PTSD? I don't think so. So he had PTSD from before he got to Lansing. Could be. He was in the military. He was a police officer. He could have PTSD. But that PTSD did not stop him from running for office. Now did it? And that PTSD did not stop him from running for re-election twice. He had a perfectly good candidate in that seat, Dylan Pescarolo. He didn't say, oh gosh, I have PTSD. I might not be able to serve my constituents to the full capacity that they are owed. So if his PTSD wasn't a problem before, why am I to believe, now that he's taken heat for his bad votes, that it is a problem now? Because here's the thing, folks. You know who else not only might have committed suicide, you know who did commit suicide? Hundreds, if not thousands, of people in Michigan because of Gretchen Whitmer's lockdowns. And every single bill that passes in Lansing and Washington has life and death consequences for people. And what for some people is an annoyance, for others is the straw that broke the camel's back. People live in the margins. And a little money here, a little money there. For someone, that's not a rent payment. For someone, that's an eviction. For someone, that's a lost job or a lost opportunity, and therefore a lost family. These things happen, and every single vote they take in Lansing has real consequences for people. And if they aren't cut out to vote appropriately with their considerations in mind, their constituents, because they have a health problem, then they need to resign immediately. So, Mike Mueller, if you are contemplating suicide because of the grief you're getting for your bad vote or for threats from the Democrats or for any other reason, you need to check into a hospital right away. You need to contact your friends, your family, your pastor, and get well and resign immediately. That state rep that killed himself, that was John Keevala. He was a Democrat. He was a recovering alcoholic. He had a relapse. He got into a car accident, and he was so embarrassed by that DUI that he killed himself. And he left behind a wife and children and 90,000 constituents who had no state rep until a special election was called to replace him. He could have gone back to rehab. He could have gone to a hospital. He chose to end his own life and to do immense harm to his family and those closest to him. Because that's what suicide is, folks. It is harming the ones that you love the most. And by the way, I am sorry for anybody here who may have someone close to them that has taken their own life. I have known 2 women who have taken their own life and people who were fellow travelers in politics, but I wouldn't say they were people I knew as like dear, dear friends and dear family. Their losses were still a terrible thing for me. And it's still something that weighs on me. And it's something that I keep in mind when I see grassroots leaders potentially burning out about how important mental health is. But I don't have a parent or a child or a niece or a nephew who's committed suicide. But some of you maybe have. I know someone who has. And that is an awful thing to talk about. So this may be an awful thing for you to hear, and I hope you just forgive me. People who commit suicide are contemptible because they harm the people that love them. And if you don't agree with that, I know, because I might have just hurt and opened wounds that are painful for people, and I'm sorry for having said that. But it's what I feel. And if you are someone in a position of extraordinary responsibility over tens of thousands of people, and you are voting on legislation that's going to harm people, and for some of them, drive them to death. And guess what's going on, folks, right now in Washington? What's going on in Ukraine? Every single day, Ukrainians are being slaughtered by the hundreds because of the foreign policy of the people in Washington. Lives are at stake over things that elected officials do all the time. If they aren't cut out for that responsibility, they have a duty to take care of themselves immediately and to resign from office. So I don't know whether Mike Mueller truly has the health issues that he has been claimed to have by the person that told that to me. That may have just been something that someone said, and I'm not saying it was coming from Mueller directly. It may have been something that someone said to get me to stop. It will not succeed. Because I was trained to understand that when a politician or the people that serve politicians tell me for whatever reason to stop doing what I'm doing, they're telling me that because doing what I'm doing is working. And that's the time to double down, not to stop. So, Mike Mueller, you're a piece of garbage. You voted with the Democrats to give them everything they wanted. You have made it harder for the people in Michigan who are suffering. And that's why in that email today, I talked about Officer Christopher Scher, who is facing murder charges for having defended his own life as a cop. And there's nobody in Grand Rapids, I mean, there's a few, but not many, not enough, coming to his aid. And nobody in Lansing did, not even Mike Mueller. We spoke about it. We did a petition about it. Mike Mueller got a letter from a constituent telling him to sign and to co-sponsor the Back the Blue Act to say that there should be a penalty for prosecutors bringing meritless charges against cops and other people charged in frivolous, politicized self-defense cases. And he didn't do anything. He's the only person out of 90,000 people, only 4 people in 270,000, if you count the senators, who can introduce legislation. He had that power. Nobody else in his district did, and he didn't do it. Nobody in Grand Rapids did either. So I'm sorry, folks. I have very, very little sympathy for the personal problems of politicians. I don't care, Mike Mueller, if you were at a wedding or a funeral or whatever said was your excuse for not showing up to vote in April of 2020 when our state was in our darkest hour. Because you had family obligations, and you put those obligations before the tens of thousands of people that you were elected to serve. And if you don't have the responsibility for doing that, you have an obligation to resign. And if you won't, then the rest of us have an obligation to find just the right man to replace you. So that's all I got for tonight, folks. I will probably see some of you at state convention this next weekend. If not, I'll see you right here on the Rescue Michigan live stream next Sunday, as always, at 9 p.m. Till next time, thanks for all you guys do for liberty. Peace.